Morning, I'm on my way to the rescue to meet up with Alan and Margaret Jones, two of the most knowledgeable experts on the Gresford disaster and North Wales mining in general. Both are incredibly active in the local community and deeply committed to preserving mining heritage. They are trustees of the North Wales Miners Association Trust, a charity working to advance the education of the public in mining and associated industries, as well as being involved in the preservation of Bersham Colliery, being prominent in the Friends of Gresford Colliery Disaster Memorial, and being active in the work of the Miners Rescue Project.
Well, I originated in what was known as Rusty Colliery houses, next door to Wrexham and Acton Colliery and just across from Gresford Colliery. It was a group of about 50 houses, very much on the Coronation Street style, and everybody working there worked in the pit. All I knew from my first memories was people talking about Gresford Colliery and the other collieries in the area.
And as for me, I'm not Wrexham born at all. I came from Derbyshire and we met at Miners Fortnight in Blackpool on the beach. So that's how we came to meet.
Born and brought up with coal mining, and I wanted to do what the big boys were doing. They were telling me stories. I was desperate to go to the pit. My dad was absolutely against it. He didn't want me down the pit. We tried a bit of all sorts, but he passed away when I was 16. So then I got my own way and I went to the pit. There was my dad's cousin, Ralph Roberts, who was one of the 30 who reopened Gresford Colliery, and I spoke to him on many, many occasions about the disaster and what had gone on. He guided me onto the ventilation team, and I ended up as ventilation officer at Gresford. Come the 70s, just before the closure, we were doing a ventilation change. And I was in the drawing office, we were deciding what we were doing, and just looking broadly, because there was no more coal to be taken from Gresford. It was coming to an end. The ICC were opening on the industrial estate, fiberglass. So I thought, with two children, now's the opportunity to jump ship. Quite a few years at the ICC. I took on a car dismantling yard, a scrapyard. I worked that for quite a few years. After that, took on the transport business, a few vans, doing different work up and down the country. I think really that's when I started to slow down a little bit.
Left school at 15 and I went first of all into an office, moved from there into a lending library, and ended up in an accountant's office in Long Eaton, Nottinghamshire. And I worked there until we got married. When we got married, we started a family, and they became my work. And after, when the youngest one was in school, so I started work at Bookland. So I worked in the bookshop for 18.5 years, and then became self-employed when I was looking after my granddaughter. And I became self-employed and did balloon decorations for.
It must have been absolutely horrendous. People were working from early hours until it was dark. They didn't see daylight for 6 days a week. It must have been absolutely horrendous. Even when I was working, the conditions, the heat and the humidity could be dreadful at Gresford. They really could. And Gresford was a very gassy pit, very gassy. It was no life. It could not have been a life. A big problem at the time prior to the explosion, when the shafts were sunk, there was new legislation that come out to say that every pit had to have two roadways, one taking air in round the face and one out. But that legislation didn't come in until 1911, and it didn't apply retrospectively. So the owners worked hell for leather to get the pit shaft sunk and the pit operational prior to 1911. So at the time of the explosion, the air was going round, different faces, picking up dust, picking up gas. In the 14s area, it must have been, again, horrible. The lads there were wearing clogs, but the holes had been drilled in them to let the sweat out. They were wearing underpants, that's it. There was no safety helmets, anything like that. But just to be working in them conditions. But this is in the 1930s. So it wasn't as though it was the 18th century or whatever. They were working in very, very bad conditions then. Personally, I've got what I think happened. If we look at the time of the explosion, just after 2 o'clock in the morning, that's the only time them guys would have had not to relax, to drink of water and something to eat. Now, they would be taken off the face, or they would go off the face to do that. Now, the face, the coal, had to be brought down. Explosives were used to bring the coal down. So they would not bring men off the face at any other time to do it. They wanted them working. So the ideal time was between 2 o'clock and 2:20, so that they could get in and fire the explosives. To me, it seems a coincidence that's when the explosion occurred. It would just take one spark from the detonators, whatever, and the place, well, it would have gone up. The shot firing, if you test with the lamp and it's clear, even if you do get sparks, it's fine. I've seen gas burning underground. I've seen not an explosion, but I've seen gas burning. And it's a frightening thing, but if it doesn't start burning the coal dust, it just gone. The men, they would keep the place going as much as everybody was out to get the coal out to get the wages. See, at that time, 25% of the country unemployed. You didn't argue with your bosses, you did as you were told.
Yeah, 40% in Wrexham at the time.
Was it 40?
In Wrexham,
wow.
Nationally,
it was 25. I didn't realise that.
40 in Wrexham.
But I remember that
yeah,
one.
40%.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
I think from what I've read, I agree with Alan. I think ventilation was a big problem because, as Alan said, because there weren't two intakes,
What intake am I about? Yeah.
The same gas as it was going there, it would go all the way around the pit, wouldn't it? Picking up particles or whatever as it went round. So the further round the pit you were, the harder it would be to breathe. The 4 points are actually, there's one just off from the flash, there's one close to the Pantrockine, and then there were two a little bit further out, aren't they?
Oh, what, the points that
they
could have been,
yes.
yeah. You've been there to the Pants, yeah.
Yeah.
When you're looking out to the back over the top, what a garden of remembrance.
Lamb came from New Zealand, and we know that apples came from Somerset. Children's homes sent clothes for the newly orphaned children.
Salted fish from Grimsby.
This column after column after column after column after column after column of the people who donated. Some of them donated 5 shillings, some of them donated hundreds of pounds, but people just wanted to do what they could because they all felt there were so many miners in the country and they all felt there, but for the grace of God, go I, didn't they? But children emptied their money boxes. I personally think that they did an excellent job. There were some people who were paid, but professional people but the majority of them, from what I can understand, and particularly latterly, had no pay at all for what they did. But they were very, very clever people who sorted out the fun, because they not only paid money for the widows and children, but they also paid for the miners who couldn't go back to work afterwards. They bought tools because the men had to buy their own tools, and the tools were left down the pit, obviously, they were burned. So people who hadn't got the tools afterwards, they spent money on tools. They sent children to university. One of the comments was that they were in 1949, I think it was, they were very pleased to note that none of the children of the disaster were before a magistrate in court.
I saw that one.
Yeah. May I just tell you about Florence?
Please.
Florence died 2 or 3 years ago, and her father died in the disaster. Her brother suffered dreadfully with what you call it? I'll tell you the name in a minute. Epilepsy. He really suffered very badly. Not before the disaster, but they were a church-going family. He went to Sunday school, as he would normally go to Sunday school. The mum didn't tell him anything. He was older than Florence. The mum didn't tell them anything about the disaster and that the father had died. But the Sunday school teacher brought him to the front of the class, and he said to Florence's brother how very sorry they were to hear about the disaster and about him losing his father. That was the first he knew of it.
Well, why didn't the mother say anything?
I think she just didn't
Just
want
tried
to
to
accept
shield
it.
it.
Okay.
Yeah. And from then on, he suffered with severe epilepsy.
Wow, so almost like a shock reaction.
Yeah. He was seen by a professor in Liverpool, and the professor said to his mother, "Has this young man ever suffered a really bad shock?" And she said, "Yes, he has really." And he said, he's absolutely full of shock. And this is some years later. Now that fund paid money until his death, as it did for others. Widows were looked after until death. There was bitterness, there was much bitterness. When Ruby is one of the children of the disaster, she remembers that they were treated badly in school. They weren't treated, it was thought that they had more money than other children.
They were being looked after not by the state then, but by the pension schemes and all that. So they were really hounded in school. I think the fund itself had been set up very, very cleverly. Peter was very, very bitter. One of his favourite was he passed his 11 plus, and all his mates were having bikes, and he didn't have one. So he went to the fund, to the officers, demanded a bike, and they told him where to go, sort of thing. The main reason they weren't charged with anything serious, they were charged with keeping insufficient records. You can't really find somebody a lot of money or send them to jail for that. So it was very cleverly orchestrated what they were being charged with.
You say orchestrated?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the powers that be, the coal owners at the time were the governing people of the country. Behind every government there's a power, and the coal owners, they were putting the great into Britain, the steamships, the collieries, from the collieries to the steamships, all over the world. They were controlling, and the government knew they could not push it too far with them, or they would be in big, big trouble.
It's heartbreaking when you think about it.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you think of Wrexham as a town, it's built on coal. But if you look into things a little bit deeper, there were coal owners or mine agents and what have you on every committee of of every part of Wrexham. I mean, really, if they sort of, it was them that built Wrexham, which is why I get sometimes a little bit cross when they're sort of forgotten about.
Say, Maesgwyn Hall, that was built by an agent of the owners. That's how wealthy he was as an agent. And he built that from nothing.
I think that, to be honest, if I blamed anybody, I was so angry when I read the report. I was so angry because the mines inspector never went near that area of the pit. He would come to Gresford and he would never go near that area.
Well, not the area, he wouldn't go down the pit.
Dominic.
Dominic.
Yeah, Dominic.
So,
Yeah, he didn't go down the pit, he would do his inspection on land and back to the office for a couple of whiskies and away to go. A lot of them wouldn't even have known anything about mining, they just what they picked up. Going back to the Cobo, the NCB, anybody starting at the NCB had the opportunity to work right the way up to manager, area manager, whatever, so they would know the job right the way through. But them days you would appoint a manager and all his job would be is to get more profit out. Yeah. Absolutely dreadful. And the big one, I think it's about 200 yards down, there's a tunnel between the two shafts, and that was to catch any water it could to pump it back to the surface. There were doorways in there to stop the air crossing. As the road went across, the cages were facing that way, so you couldn't get out of the cage and go into this little tunnel. You had to go down on top of the cage with the chains hooked on. And then there was a gap about that much, which you had to step over. But when you were doing it, it looked about 10 times wider, wet and slippy. But say, that was catching any water that had come through the strata. Now, they'd shut the pit, and the pumps would had it by now, the doors had blown off, whatever. But the water was still going in there. So now it's coming down the side of the shaft and down the pit. So the first job they had to do when they were lowered down was to seal them with sandbags to stop the water going down where they were going to go. And they were stood on a piece of metal about 3 inches wide, trying to lift sandbags to place to stop the water. And the idea was if they could block the one side on the Martin, the water would then go down the Dennis and they could deal with that at a later stage. But they got these sandbags up holding the water. But every time they went below that, there was just sandbags holding back huge amount of water. They were so brave to do that, they really were. Tubs had been thrown about like confetti, just blown in all directions. To go down and then get off the cage to try and work amongst that, it's really, really, well, not again, at 20 you're fearless anyway. It would have been exciting to go, but it would have been very, very dangerous. And all they had was a little hand lamp and an oil lamp. At the time of the explosion, there were only 6 electric lamps at Wrexham, and the electricians had them. The lighting was negligible. But then 30 guys to reopen the colliery, it was just unbelievable. Just yards off where the bodies should have been, and they were told it's too dangerous to go anymore. But the colliery was reopened now.
Was that a fair decision?
No.
They could have got the bodies?
They could have got to some of the bodies, yeah. Well, Ralph he told me that. Yeah, absolutely. The owners said, oh, we need to get these bodies out. But they got close to them and then decided no need to go any further. But can I just explain again? Sorry, one more. If we look into the map, the 2 shafts there, over here is the Dennis section. Over here is the slant. That was totally perfect, no explosions in there. So they knew, once they'd sealed that, They were back with a multi-million-pound industry up and running again, and they haven't got to worry about them bodies or finding the real cause. I can't say I had a lot of feeling, to be honest. I mean, you knew they were there, but I felt that my job was to make sure it didn't happen again. You know, that was my priority. Dismantled the headgate, took the wheel for the memorial. The other one was bought by McAlpines, who owned the sand quarries at the time.
Right.
He was going to send it to one of his friends in America, as you do with a 10-ton wheel, you know, I'll send it off to him in America. But there was a big shout and a who and a half. So he had it at the Borough Sand pit, and he was stopped sending it on, and it was left there, and there were trees growing through it. Then St Christopher's School were given a piece of land there. Now they come across the wheel, and they were told you can have it. So they buried it, stood upright. I've negotiated, Breedon, the quarry owners, are going to pay to get it excavated, repaired, painted and delivered to the racecourse.
For me, I think was when at the meeting when Vicar David and Ruby asked if we would help to raise a committee, and I didn't know at that time that 84-year-old lady had collected all the dead flowers up after every service and put them in bin bags and took them away. I took it for granted that the council did that. Those two people did everything to have a service at the memorial, didn't they?
Yeah.
And they asked us for help.
Okay.
And there was no doubt about it. That's what we had to do. To think of that lovely man having helped take his service for 33 years.
He conducted the service without a committee or anything.
Yeah.
Him and Ruby, little ones, organised it themselves. But my biggest moment's yet to come when that wheel goes up there. That's going to be my big thing, that.
Yeah.
And it'll happen. I know it's going to happen. We're invited to schools, and again, that's something to look back on. We can talk to children, and then they'll come to Bersham Colliery, and they remember every damn thing you've told them. They just, like sponges, just took it in, and you think, wow.